Well, hello, Forest Meadow. Welcome back to another episode of Sermon Reflections. We hope that you guys had a wonderful Sunday, and thank you so much for coming and joining us and worshiping the Lord. And as always, we hope that you guys are growing in your faith as you guys dig deeper into the book of Matthew. And by the way, if you missed that service, you can find it up here in this link, or you can find it in the description below, along with all of the questions that we have for these videos. It makes sense to watch the sermon first before these, so that way they make sense. Let's consider some of the things that we talked about on Sunday. We talked about Jesus having compassion on the faint. You know, it's easy for us as we are in our prayer life, right? It's easy for us to feel like our needs are too insignificant for Jesus to be bothered by them. But the truth is, they're not. The Lord, does He care about our eternal needs? Yes. Are they more important? Yes. But He still cares about our temporal needs. And although Jesus often teaches us through our lack of these basic things, He teaches us through our lack of whether it's food or water or money or health or time or strength or any other resource, wisdom perhaps, He still cares about every single need. And when we lack these basic things, Jesus is moved to compassion, just like He was with these people, with the 4,000. He is splanchnizomai. He is moved to the core of His being when He sees us without those necessary things. And it's encouraging to remember that. Another thing to notice is how much of the book of Matthew has been spent focusing on the northern part of Israel, where there's a greater population of Gentiles, because of the Greek influence that was there. One thing that Mark points out, the Gospel of Mark, is that Jesus had been in the Decapolis just prior to this story, which would mean that there's probably more Gentiles there, that there's more Gentiles who are receiving food from Jesus, receiving healing from Jesus, and also receiving the teaching of Jesus. And I think that this fits very well with the Canaanite woman, right, whose daughter was just healed. She received healing from her daughter. He set her free. She received so much more than just breadcrumbs. She received the Messiah. It's amazing how the Gentiles are now beginning to believe, but this starts this controversy. It kind of splits apart these groups of religious leaders, because now those who were not His people are called sons of the living God, which provokes them to jealousy. So, another thing we looked at is Jesus' patience with His disciples. Although they're struggling with these lessons, Jesus is not angry. We do see Him, on the other hand, in Matthew 16. He says, "You men of little faith, do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves, the 5,000, and the leftovers?" Jesus doesn't forsake His disciples because they struggle to understand, but instead, He patiently teaches them, just like He patiently teaches us. He repeats the lessons for slow-learning disciples. Now, there are several reasons why we might need lessons repeated, right? We named 3 yesterday why we repeat these lessons. Because, number 1, because we forget the lesson. Number 2, because we fail to learn the lesson at its core. Or number 3, so that way we don't forget the lesson. And the last point really can be split into 2 points. It is obviously important that we don't forget, but also there is another aspect, the aspect of teaching. We know that in order to teach something, we must learn it at a deeper level. And this focuses the emphasis not on ourselves learning again, but the emphasis is on those who are around us who need to learn. The disciples needed this repeated. They needed this lesson repeated because they had failed to learn it. But that wasn't the only reason. They also needed it because they needed to teach this to us, to the rest of the church. We have to remember that the lesson from this passage is so critical. It's the lesson that we believe in Jesus, that He is who He says He is. It's so critical. But those who are learning the lesson are disciples now, but they will become apostles. This is not a lesson that they could afford to skip. They can't miss the lesson if they're going to be able to teach it to the rest of the world. And so we have to consider that. Jesus spent long hours trying to teach his disciples to believe in him, to trust him, to not doubt. And it wasn't just for their own sake, but it was also for the sake of those who are around them. When you consider the apostles, you consider their suffering, their pain, their trials, these long-learned lessons, the sleeplessness, the shipwrecks, the persecutions. These are all repeated lessons in the lives of the disciples. But it's not necessarily because they haven't learned, but it may be also because those around them need to learn from their lives. Just a thought to consider. Well, let's move on to some of our questions for today. Our first question is, why did Jesus heal people and perform miracles? And what was the purpose behind this? Number 2, why did the disciples not get the point of the feeding of the people the first time? Number 3, why were the people faint, and why didn't they just leave? What was their real hunger? Number 4, why did Jesus want to feed them? Number 5, why is Jesus patient with his disciples? And how does Jesus' example teach us to be patient with those who are around us? Number 6, why don't the disciples understand in Matthew chapter 16, verse 11? Number 7, what is the significance of having leftovers? And why not just enough food? Number 8, why didn't the disciples get the point of the feeding of the people the second time? What was clouding their minds? What do you think? That's a very helpful question, by the way. Number 9, how many times did Jesus foretell his death and resurrection to the disciples? And how many disciples believed that Jesus would raise from the dead after his crucifixion? And finally, number 10, does belief just happen? Or how does it happen? And what can we do, what can we practically do in our lives to grow in our faith towards God? Well, that's about all the time that we have for today. Just as a quick teaser, on Sunday, we're going to be looking at Jesus' very tense interaction with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You know, they asked Jesus for a sign. And although Jesus had performed countless signs in the region, all over the place, he had performed all kinds of signs, he does not give them a sign. And my question to you is, why not? Why doesn't Jesus give them a sign? Well, if you have a thought, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to dig deeper into the scriptures. And I want to say thank you so much for just joining us. And I hope that you have a great day. Thanks.